Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why we cannot be married to exercises. All right, we can't get hung up or caught up in the idea that there is any one best exercise or a goal, or any one best exercise for building a muscle. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that the more advanced we get, number one, the more varied stimulus we sometimes need to see maximum development. Number two, the more prone we become to overuse injuries. And this can be an issue both in terms of strength and muscularity and hypertrophy. Uh, and what I mean by that is this is more of a problem for more advanced lifters. Now, the novice lifter, this isn't necessarily for you. Because when we make videos like this and we discuss these concepts for people who have a year or two or three of training experience under their belt, we're assuming you've already mastered the basics. Right? We're assuming you know how to perform a proper squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, row, and that you've built up a decent strength base learning the basics, right? And learning these basic movement patterns. Because for the novice lifter, getting caught up in this mindset that I'm going to discuss can actually slow your progress. Right, it can slow your progress because you don't have weak links. You're not strong enough and probably not training with enough volume to be overly concerned with overuse injuries. And if you're on a good system of balanced, big, basic movements that are building the body relatively evenly with loads dispersed through it, right? In other words, big movements that disperse all the load across multiple tendons and joints, you're not as concerned with overuse injuries and things like that. Also, you don't need to worry about varied loading to maximize the muscle. You're going to grow like a weed as long as you're progressing on those movements and eating enough. When I think the confusion when you tell novices like that, they're like, oh, so I'm going to look like this guy after a year over here. It's like, well, no, of course not. That guy's got 10 years of training experience and uses anabolics. You're not going to look like him. And he's probably got a little bit of Photoshop and lighting helping on top of it. But over to the point, the more advanced we get, we have to look into these things. And what I mean is that we can't get caught up in the idea that there's one exercise we can do and that we are always going to get the best development from it. You know, you'll get people who do that like, well, I focused really hard on the incline barbell bench press and my chest blew up. Well, your chest blew up because you focused on a good movement and did a lot of work with it. But do you know for an absolute fact that something else would have worked better? Or if you had done 3 different chest movements, you might not have gotten better development over time? Or if you'd rotated through them a bit? I mean, do you know that for a fact? You don't. You just know that you tried this and it worked. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we're going to have movements that if you get an exercise, I don't care whether it's a flat bench, floor press, incline bench with the football bar, incline bench with the dumbbells, choosing to do your overhead press with an axle bar instead of a barbell. Look, if you get a movement that you feel really, really hammers an area and you can feel it working deeply, you're able to progress on it good, it doesn't seem to hurt your tendons or your joints or anything, look, by all means, put a lot of effort into that exercise, right? It's probably a pretty good choice for your structure, right? And that's a reasonable thing because different lifts are going to affect our structures a little bit differently. We are built slightly differently. We're going to have different joint angles. We're going to have grip widths and angles that are going to be comfortable for one person and painful for another. That's okay. We adjust around it, but make sure it's your technique that's happening there. Because what you find a lot of times for more advanced lifters, we're used to doing movements. We're used to understanding our body, and so oftentimes we can get that same effect out of any variation as long as we find our groove on it, right? We can find it on anything. But the point is, it doesn't mean that it's the best. And what we have to keep in mind as you get more advanced, what you're going to find is that sometimes a stubborn muscle needs couple different angles. And I'm not saying you got to do what bodybuilders do and you need 5 different exercises and need a chest day where you come in and do 5 different movements and an arm day where you do 7 different types of curl. That's not what we're saying. But I'm saying sometimes hitting a muscle with 2 or 3 different movements It doesn't even have to be on the same day, because most people who know what they're doing, who are under a decent coach or follow decent programming, it's things like an upper lower are pretty common. Even a 4-day upper lower, that's kind of your baseline template among most of the best coaches, right? You could do a different movement in there, right? You could do incline and floor press on one of your upper body days, and you could do flat bench and the overhead press on a different, or use different barbells. You could do different things and make it work quite well with the programming. Okay, so you could have 4 different movements through the week split on 2 different days. Or you could rotate them in phases. Because that's the other thing to think about. What happens when, number 1, we stall on an exercise? Number 2, we do so much volume on a specific movement that we do start to get a little bit of tendon pain. Okay. Fast lifters who are knowledgeable know not to push through that. What do you do when you start to feel some overuse at a tendon or a joint or a muscle insertion? Well, it's probably a good time to rotate that lift. Okay. Might be time to change your incline for an overhead press. Might be time to change to a different barbell. Might be time for that, again, because these might be smaller movements you're doing for a lot of reps, not necessarily your real heavy work. Might be time to switch from a barbell to a dumbbell for a while. Right? Might be time to change your bench to a dip. It's a good time to start rotating stuff around. And I'll go so far as to say that sometimes there are plenty of coaches out there who only have a lifter progress on some of these lifts for maybe 3 weeks and then switch to a variation. Push it really hard, try to get 3 weeks of hard progression. Usually about that point, oftentimes you stall a little bit, and then they might have them change exercises or change volume. Okay? And that's before we even get into the topic of periodization. I think most people who are going to be on my channel around here are going to be using some sort of concurrent training at this point if they're not novices. But again, change from 3x10 to 4x10. Right? Change to 3 sets of 12. You can change stuff around. But, rotating exercises at that point. Because number 1, sometimes a novel training effect. Okay, if you've pushed hard progression for 3 weeks on a movement and people say, oh, well, that's all neurological. Not necessarily. Because if they're similar movements, it's not. Do you really think doing a dumbbell chest press is a completely different movement pattern than a barbell? Or do you think switching to a football bar is a completely different movement, or switching from a bench to a floor press? It's the same movement pattern. And when you're an advanced lifter, you already know movement patterns, or even an intermediate usually. You're not getting a big, steep learning curve. It's not like a novice who's learning something totally novel. But you may be hitting muscles at a different angle. You might be recruiting a few muscle fibers through your pecs, through your front delts, through your triceps that aren't normally being fully activated the same way. So that little bit of novel training response, if you push progression hard for 3 weeks, may give a little bit of extra growth. Now, does that mean we're going to see the difference? Probably not. People who've been training more than 2 or 3 years don't see a noticeable difference in a muscle growth in a month. If you do, it's in your head. It's a delusion. It's just what you're seeing in the mirror. Okay? We grow very, 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 very slowly, unless a hefty amount of a significant change of anabolic substances has occurred in your body. And a test booster is not what I'm talking about. So we can get a novel training response. We might help build a little bit of some part of that muscle a little bit better. And it may not be a visible part. Sometimes it can be just individual fibers involved with a joint angle. Maybe get recruited that we hadn't fully worked in the past. And then, at 3 weeks, that starts to cap out, and maybe we switch to a slight variation. And that's not a bad idea either, because we come over to, again, avoiding overuse. But if you're married to a movement and you've decided that the hip thrust is the be-all, end-all for glute development, okay, or that the incline bench is the be-all, end-all for pectoral development, and that there is a best exercise, right? That mindset is not going to be useful for you here. That sort of mindset is going to put you into, number 1, less gains potential, Number two, it's going to predispose you to a higher risk of injury, and it's going to predispose you to a higher risk of plateauing for longer periods of time. Okay, and that's just a simple reality. You can't be married to exercises. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.